So our first raffle is gonna be profits first.
Hold on first, does everybody have their card?
Oh yeah. Does everybody have their card, business card in here? Everybody? Yeah? Okay. So a little bit about profits first. I've read this book, and I hope some of you have read it. It's really good for small businesses. A lot of the times as a small business, you put yourself last and the business first. So this is a good book, again, for understanding financials as a growing business, what to do with your money as you continue to grow, and where to allocate that money to benefit you in the long run. So this is a great book. So go ahead.
I hope I take it.
Remember which card.
The yellow one?
Hey, cover her eyes.
Okay, first one. Will Pasillas.
Biggest sticky note.
Cool guys, well, that's it for now. Continue to mingle. Let us know if you guys want to get introduced to anybody. We'll continue to connect everybody. And in about 15 minutes, we'll do another raffle and have one of our other speakers.
Have some pastries and
Yes,
tamales.
please, I don't wanna take all this home.
The door is officially locked until all that is gone, okay? Okay, but please make sure you stay around, or else we will chase you down. Because right at 10, we're gonna have our amazing State Representative Evans speaking to us. So make sure you get tamales and you're well fed so that you can hear everything he has to say. Alright? Sorry's gonna be like, yes, stand as much as possible. But this is your chance to get some pastries, some tamales, and you can be enjoying while we hear him. So, State Representative, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you all so much for coming here. My name's Gabe Evans. I'm state representative, and I'll explain what that looks like here in a second. The areas that I represent are Brighton, all of the surrounding areas around Brighton. So I come as far east as Hawley, and then as far south as 112th, and then the district goes all the way up north, up to but not including Greeley. So about 45,000 folks in Adams County, 45,000 folks in Weld County. I got 9 different cities and towns inside the district. So my background, my story actually starts with my grandparents. So on the Evans side, Grandpa Evans, he was a naval aviator for 20 years. Flew off of aircraft carriers on the other side. My abuelito Chavez actually immigrated from Mexico to the United States. Got his citizenship in World War II, and then he worked down at Fort Bliss in El Paso for pretty much the rest of his career after that. And so between both my grandparents, being veterans coming from a long line of folks that served in the military, when I was in college, I joined the military as well because I had to pay those college bills, and Uncle Sam told me he would do that for me. So spent 12 years in the U.S. Army and the Colorado Army National Guard out here at Buckley Air Force Base. Most of that time I was a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. So deployment overseas, 2012, 2013 to the Middle East, and then every time we have wildfires and search and rescues and all the other stuff that happens here in Colorado that you need the National Guard for, done those missions as well. My wife tells me that I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm married, I have 2 boys, 7 and 11. So military wasn't quite enough fun for me, so then I did 10 more years in law enforcement with the city of Arvada as a police officer, promoted a couple of times, became a police lieutenant. And then just last year is when I stepped away from law enforcement to go do state representative stuff. And what really drove me to do that was just seeing the rising crime and seeing that some of the policies that were coming from the state capitol felt like they weren't as well thought out as they should be. And that affects small businesses. You know, if I had a nickel for every time that I went and I had to talk to somebody that worked, you know, in the trades, let's say, they were a plumber, they worked in construction, they were an electrician. Colorado's the #1 state in the nation right now for auto theft. So when they get their plumber van stolen, it's not just their van that's stolen, it's their livelihood that's stolen. They have all of their personally owned tools, all of their personally owned equipment in there, And as I'm out there talking to these folks, I can see the wheels turning in their head as they're thinking, okay, I can't show up at the job site tomorrow. And that means the drywall can't go up until the plumbing is in place. So that means either the general contractor's, he's probably not gonna be able to wait for me because that's now costing him money. So he's gotta go out, he's gotta go find another plumber to put in the pipes. And then, 3 months later, after the guy who had his van stolen is able to get the tools and get the equipment back, well, he's lost all of those contracts. He literally has to build his business from square one. And so it frustrated me, well, why are we the #1 state in the nation for auto theft? This is hurting our small businesses. This is hurting working families. This is hurting people that are just trying to do it, my parents and my grandparents did, which is build that generational wealth. When my abuelito, right before he died, he wrote us a letter and he said, when we came here from Mexico, it was in the middle of the Depression, we didn't speak the language, it was really hard. But I worked hard to give you a leg, to give your mom. Last year I ran for the State House of Representatives. So in Colorado, we have a state capitol down in Denver. You'll hear it referred to as the Gold Dome. It's basically a little mini version of what we have in Washington, D.C. So at the federal level, you have the president, you have the Senate, you have the House of Representatives, and they're the ones that make all the laws. We have the same thing in Colorado. You've got the state house, the state senate, and the governor, and they make all of the laws for the state of Colorado. In Colorado, there are 65 state representatives. I'm one of those state representatives, and each one of us represents about 90,000 folks. Then you have the state senate. There's 35 state senators, and they each represent somewhere around like 165,000 folks. And then you have the governor. He's obviously the governor over the state. So to pass a law, you have to get a majority of the votes in the state house. So that's 33 votes. Then it goes over to the Senate, where they get to talk about it too. You gotta get a majority of senators to vote for it, so that's 18. And then the governor has to sign it. So we talk about your three lucky numbers are 33, 18, and 1. If you want a law passed, you gotta convince 33 states representatives, 18 state senators, and then you gotta get the governor to sign it. So that's what I do 4 months out of the year as a state legislator. Per the Colorado State Constitution, the legislature is in session from January to May every year. That's when we make all the laws, pass all the bills, hopefully do good for the community. Sometimes though, there's a lot of things that have unintended consequences that impact business owners. And so that's just what I wanted to talk briefly about today, was how you can be engaged as small business owners in knowing what's going on down at the state capitol. How many folks here have heard of Family, the new leave program that folks have to comply with if you have enough employees? That's something that came out of the state legislature. There were some other pieces of legislation this year that talked about like landlords, that talked about like selling multifamily property. So if there's an apartment complex that's gonna be sold, adding different regulations and requirements to that. There was a bill this year that talked about restaurants. If somebody owns restaurants and you have more than 3 locations, this bill actually ended up not passing, but it was very close to passing, and it would have said that you have to have the schedule for your employees locked down within 2 weeks of it being published. So today's September 11th. So you would have to have the schedule for your employees published out through September 25th. And if you changed anything between now and September 25th, then the restaurant owner they would have to pay a fine for doing that. Obviously, I worked at a restaurant when I was a kid. My second job was I was the busboy. I cleaned up all the dirty plates and got ready for the dishwasher to wash. Obviously, when you're working with high schoolers or folks like that, they have stuff that comes up. You can't lock that schedule down 2 weeks in advance, and so that puts a really big liability on business owners to where they go, if I change my schedule because one of my high school kids either called in sick or they got to go do a school event or something like that, why do I got to pay a fee for that? That hurts business owners. And so fortunately we were able to stop that particular piece of legislation. But those are the conversations that happen down at the state capitol, and those are the different things that if you have a small business or you're trying to build that small business, it's important to be able to stay engaged in. So one of the first ways to stay engaged is just figure out who your state representatives and your state senators are, because they're supposed to be the folks that are representing you, they're listening to your concerns, they're supposed to be reaching out and asking questions about, hey, we have this particular piece of legislation in front of us. I'll give you an example. We had a bill that came this last year that I worked on a lot that said that any retailer in the state of Colorado that sells a household appliance, they're only allowed to sell an appliance that meets whatever the highest like Energy Star certification is. You get little stickers on the side where it says how much energy it uses. Unless it's the highest level, whatever the highest level of Energy Star rating, it would not be permitted to be sold in Colorado. They wanted it to be effective next year. Well, that came through the committee that I was on, and I said, I don't know that we can actually do this. So I went to a lot of the folks that sell appliances. And I said, do we even have the supply chain in place to be able to produce this many, highest level energy efficient dishwashers and microwave, or are we going to induce a supply chain crisis where people legitimately can't go out and buy a household appliance because there's not enough Energy Star certified appliances available? And so what all of the folks that produce those appliances, all of the folks that sell those appliances told me is, yeah, you're exactly right. It's gonna take us at least 2 years to be able to build up the supply chain of all of these different appliances, be able to train the workforce, not only to build it, but be able to handle like the warranty issues, right? You buy a dishwasher and it's a lemon, it breaks 2 weeks later. Well, they need to have a technician that can answer the phone, that can actually knows how the new dishwasher is put together to be able to figure out, whether or not they can cover this under warranty. And so, working with a lot of different business groups, a lot of different business interests, we were able to have conversations about this bill and say, look, we need to have what are called amendments. You change the bill's introduced, and then whenever all the other legislators, the representatives and senators and the folks that represent industry get to take a look at it, they say, look, this isn't workable. There's a lot of unintended consequences in this bill. And so we need to change this. So I worked with a lot of them to figure out what are some of the changes that we can negotiate. It's all negotiations down there. What are some of the changes that we can negotiate with the sponsors of this piece of legislation to make it so that folks in Colorado actually can go out in 2024 and buy a household appliance, and that we're not going to self-create an appliance shortage by setting a standard that's so high that we can't even meet it. And so we were able to get 5 different amendments on that bill that really helped out the folks that are building and selling and working in that area that sells household appliances. So those are the things that we do. How many of you had heard about that up until now? Right? So here's how a bill becomes law in the state of Colorado, right? Go back to your high school classes on government. A bill is introduced. Each one of us legislators gets to introduce 5 bills. A bill is just a proposed law. We get to introduce 5 bills. So if you've got 100 legislators and we each get to introduce 5 bills, that means most years we see a minimum of 500 proposed laws. And we gotta work through all of these in 120 days. So to work through all of these, the bill is introduced. It can either be introduced in the House or the Senate. If it's introduced in the House, it'll be called HB, House Bill. And then the first 2 numbers will be, so like the appliance one that I talked about, that was HB 23-1161. What that means is HB, introduced in the House. 23, it was introduced in the 2023 session. House bills start at the number 1000. So 1161 means that that's the 161st bill that's introduced in the House. Senate bills, very similar, SB 23, but they start at 1. So your Senate bills will go from like 1 to 200. Your House bills start at 1,000. They'll go from like 1,000 to 1,300, something like that. So they're introduced a House bill would be introduced in the House. It's then assigned to a committee. There's 11 standing committees that look at these bills, and they look at the bills on a much like a working group. So it's not all 65 legislators looking at it. It's a House committee is typically 9 to 13 people that have expertise or are supposed to have expertise in that area. So I represent Brighton up to Greeley. There's a lot of energy in that district. We got the Vestas plant that makes the wind turbines. We've got solar panels. We've got oil and gas. So I sit on the energy committee, which is why I know about House Bill 1161, because it dealt with energy efficiency. So that came in front of my committee. When these bills go in front of committees, if you happen to know about it, that's your option to be able to testify and actually go in front of the legislature. You can either do it in person or on Zoom and say, hey, I have a small business, I work in this area, here's my thoughts on this particular piece of legislation. You can provide your input at that committee hearing to either the state senators or the state representatives. After that bill goes through the committee on one chamber, the House, let's say, then all 65 representatives get to debate it and vote on it. Then it goes over to the Senate where it goes through the exact same process. It gets assigned to another committee. That's your second chance to be able to talk to or testify to that bill. Then it goes to the full Senate to discuss. And then if both the House and the Senate pass it and they agree on whatever version they pass, because you could get an amendment in the House that doesn't get on in the Senate and vice versa, then they have to come together and come to some sort of agreement. Then it goes to the governor to either sign or to veto. So what's important for you all is to know that there's, at least for any bill, there's 2 opportunities for you all to be able to testify on that bill and be able to say, hey, here's how this affects me as a small business owner. But we got 500 bills and 120 days. Things move fast down there. If I have 5 whole minutes to be able to have a conversation about one thing, I'm doing really good that day before I gotta jump on to the next thing. So the way that you all can stay informed about what's in front of the legislature is whatever your particular group is. You know, let's say you work in real estate. Let's say you work in marketing. Let's say, whatever your particular industry is, there are generally like statewide or regional industry groups that represent, down at the state capitol that represent those concerns. And then they typically have somebody that's boots on the ground down at the Capitol that keeps track of all these pieces of legislation and say, oh, hey, this bill just got introduced. We think this might impact real estate agents. And so then they will be able to push information back to you if you're a member of those different groups or organizations and say, hey, this piece of legislation has come up. Here's what it does. Here's when it's being heard. If you have input on it, now's your chance to be able to testify. So being a part of chambers of commerce or just networking groups like this is really, really important for being able to stay in touch with what the state legislature is doing so that you can have that input and hopefully have that conversation with your state representative or your state senator to say, yeah, this is a good piece of legislation, this will really help me out, or no, I see what you're trying to do here, but there's unfortunately a lot of unintended consequences in this bill that are really, really gonna jeopardize my industry and my ability to be able to do my job because of more regulation, higher costs, higher liability, whatever the thing happens to be. And so then you would then have the opportunity to write or call your legislator. If you wanted to, you can testify in front of one of those committees and work with whatever the different groups are that try to keep you informed when things are happening so fast down at the state legislature from January to May. So that's something that's critically important to me, just because, like I said, you heard my story, right? My grandpa, my abuelito, grew up dirt poor on my dad's side. He was a West Texas boy. He wanted to get out of Texas because there was nothing happening in El Paso, according to his view. He joined the Navy. They built the foundation that got me here. And I know that's what all of you folks are trying to do, right? You're building that foundation with your business to build that better life, to build that American dream, to be able to pass that on someday to your friends, to your family, to your kids, whoever it happens to be. But that's why y'all are here, because y'all are business owners. You all are trying to make yourself to better your position in life the same way that my parents, my grandparents did for me.